Now, it was an extraordinary verdict by a coroner that promises to change social media and do a huge amount to protect children from online harm. The coroner said 14-year-old Molly Russell died from an act of self-harm while suffering from depression and the negative effects of online content. In other words, social media was partly to blame for Molly's death. It was a crucial victory for Ian Russell, her father, who had fought a long battle to hear those words. After the inquest, he said this.
We should not be sitting here. This should not happen because it does not need to happen. But we told this story in the hope that change would come about. I hope that the world will be safer. The digital world particularly will be a safer place to inhabit. And the final thing I want to say is thank you, Molly, for being my daughter.
A hugely emotional moment, but are things really going to change, or are millions of children still at grave risk? Well, Ian Russell is here with me now. Thank you for coming in. And you fought an extraordinary battle to get this inquest verdict, a very significant verdict. But 6 weeks on, do you think things really will change?
That's such an important question, Mark. I think they have to change. They have to change for the sake of our young people. There's still an awful lot of harmful content available online, very easily available. And in fact, there was a survey published by Samaritans only last week, a survey commissioned by the Samaritans, undertaken by Swansea University, that said over 3/4 of young people had come across self-harm content by the time they were 14. And of that number of people, 83% didn't go searching for that content. It was pushed to them by the platform's algorithms. So they were confronted with content, harmful content, that they didn't even want to see.
So for viewers who don't know, what kind of content was Molly exposed to?
It's very hard because as a broadcaster, you're not allowed to show a lot of the content Molly was exposed to. Newspapers can't print it, you can't broadcast it, and yet it's readily available on platforms that officially have a lower age limit of 13.
But this is material almost encouraging self-harm?
Yeah, there's material that normalises self-harm. There's material that shows graphic self-harm wounds, and that's very disturbing to see, quite often quite gory, quite bloody, and not pleasant to see. But then there's material that encourages sort of depressive thinking, a sense of worthlessness, which I think is actually the more dangerous of the two sorts of material. They're both horrible. But that sense that Molly had, as we know, because she left us some notes, that she felt hopeless and worthless, and she felt a burden to other people, when in fact it was completely the opposite, is the material that encouraged that sense in her, that said simply things, a little cartoon drawing. I say this quite often, the one that sticks in my mind is a cartoon drawing of a sad-looking girl that just said, "Who would love a suicidal girl?" And it wasn't just that one post, which on its own might not be too harmful or dangerous, but Molly saw hundreds, if not thousands, of those posts in the last weeks and months of her life.
And this stuff is still out there. The chief executive of NSPCC said the other day, more than a month after the coroner concluded social media contributed to the death of Molly, the sites our children use are still awash with dangerous self-harm and suicide content because there are no consequences for industry inaction. So what are the chances, and I know this online safety bill is going through the process, but it is being delayed and it looks as if it might be watered down. How worried are you about that?
That is a massive worry, and it's not just a worry for me. Sadly, I've met too many other parents in very similar circumstances. The official stats in the UK show that there are, on average, 4 school-aged children that die by suicide every week That's 4 Mollies, 4 families like mine, 4 sets of friends who've lost someone. So the age of self-regulation has failed. And the only thing that will change that is government regulation to make the tech platforms put their house in order. The third reading of this bill, which has been well considered, there was public consultation, there was a joint scrutiny committee that looked at the bill and made sure that it was as good as possible before it went to the House of Commons. The third reading of that bill in the Commons should have happened in July, but because of the political turmoil in the government at the time, change of leadership, it was delayed. Should have come back in early November. It's been delayed again, and we are waiting for a date when that will happen. And the problem is that that bill has to get through the Commons, and then the House of Lords have to have enough time to scrutinise it, because it should be scrutinised in both chambers. That's how this thing works in our country. And so that normal process of scrutiny by the House of Lords, it needs to have enough time to do its job.
Right, and I mean, it's going very slowly, and it is being watered down, particularly in terms of this harmful but legal content. And they're now talking about allowing it for adults, but not for children. Now, that then relies on this whole idea of a proper age verification. So, I mean, how concerned are you that the tech companies will, in a sense, be let off the hook?
I am concerned that there's a possibility the tech companies will be let off the hook, and that horrifies me because I know what I've lived through, and I don't want anyone else to have to live through what I've lived through. And as the coroner found, social media played a part in Molly's death. So this has to stop. It's really important that protections for children online are at the highest possible levels. We protect ourselves in our offline world. We have speed limits on motorways, and we have seatbelts in cars and airbags. We acknowledge the dangers and we protect ourselves. We need to start doing that online as well.
So if this doesn't get through in this parliamentary term, would you feel personally let down? Would you think the government had let you down?
I would think the government has let not just me down, but every parent in this country down if the online safety bill, in a meaningful way, isn't given enough time to be debated properly and to be on the statute books so that Ofcom, the regulator, who are waiting in the wings, ready to do this, they're keen and eager. They've already got staff working on how they're going to regulate this. They're ready to go. This just needs to get a move on, get through Parliament, so that children and young people in particular can be protected online.
And the stats are mind-numbing. More than 2/3 of British children aged 5 to 15 using social media. You hinted at this. 1/3 have seen upsetting content of some sort. I mean, these are huge numbers. And just to be clear, that Molly's behaviour in the real world, Ian, gave you no indication that she was inhabiting this bleak online world that you knew nothing about.
There was no indication that there was any mental health problems with Molly beforehand. She contributed in a normal way to our family life. She was really happy. She may have spent a little bit more time in her room, as her older sisters had done before her. She was a teenager. She did come to me and say, I'd like to give up horse riding, which withdrawing from hobbies is a sign to look out for. But she didn't just say, I'm bored with it. She said, I want to give up horse riding because I've plateaued, and I think by having a rest and going back to it, it would be better for me. There was always a forward-looking thing. The weekend before she died, she was looking forward to her birthday, which was on the 21st of November. She would have been 20 this year. She was looking forward to her 15th birthday. She'd written a birthday list. She'd bought presents for her sisters, who also had November birthdays. She was so forward-looking and so positive. It was a bolt from the blue. It was a horror story for us.
So, I mean, so there are so many questions that you have that may never be answered.
I think that's always the case after a suicide. And one of the other things I think the online safety bill has to talk about is the process by which the authorities, not necessarily the family, but the authorities can gain data. We struggled during the inquest process, which is one of the reasons it took so long. We had a very supportive coroner who did everything within his power to get data from the platform so that we could look into Molly's viewing habits. It took ages for them to give that data to his inquest.
Do you think that's easier now, or would it be easier under an online safety bill?
It needs to be, and there needs to be measures in the bill that there's almost a sort of automatic process where a coroner or a official law enforcement request, when they are received, the tech companies automatically preserve and deliver the data to the authorities in the same way that a police officer can come to your house with a search warrant and search your premises. They need the search warrant, but they can do that. The same thing, again, has to happen in the online world.
Now, finally, Ian, there will be other Mollys out there. There will be other youngsters in a similar situation. Do you have any advice? What would your advice be to parents who may be listening to this or know what happened and are deeply worried? What would your advice be to those parents?
It's really hard because you have to keep up a channel of communication. You have to keep that dialogue going between the generations so that the younger members of the family feel happy enough to talk about their problems, empowered enough to talk about their problems to their parents, and that's a big challenge. And if you're concerned about someone, whether you're a parent or a friend or you're someone who is struggling, the most important thing is to know that there is help and you need to seek out trusted support. Don't look in the darker places on the internet. You can text MRF for the Molly Rose Foundation. You can text MRF to 85258. That's a text line run by Shout, who look after anyone that contacts them in so many different ways. But that's a very good place to go, for example, if you're looking for help.
OK, Ian, look, my heart goes out to you, and thank you very much for what you're doing. Thank you.